Alright, let's get this party started. First thing I do when I pull this vehicle on the hoist is to verify my pedal operation and pedal height. This vehicle seemed good, so I'm starting here on the back corner and I'm going to start inspecting these brakes. So pull the tire off. I'm going to grab my pad thickness indicators or my pad gauges, whatever you would like to refer to them as, and see what kind of fitment I have here for my pad thickness. Now these pads were about done for. You can see that I've got the first red one in there. It fits just a little loose, but the yellow one wouldn't fit. So that puts these pads at discard, and we're going to replace them. Now different calipers are going to come off in a different way. Now this caliper, I already loosened up my caliper slide bolts, and then I just kind of gave that caliper a squeeze by hand to give me the clearance to pull it off. Now this was a system that was very hard to get all the bolts. I had to do some end wrench fiddling to get to them all, so I just did one side of the caliper at a time. I popped my pads off of here so I can get a better look at them and see what I've got going on. And you can see that, as we indicated with the inboard pad, this outboard pad was just about worn also. So a little bit thicker than the smallest thread gauge, but still just a little bit thinner than the yellow one. So it's time to replace these pads. So the next thing I need to take into account for is the rotor, and if I will be saving the rotors or not. So I took a measurement here and I lost my conversion, but my specs were in millimeters and my micrometer is in inches. And if I remember correctly, I had about 18 thousandths I could machine off of this rear rotor, and it was literally $2 cheaper to buy the new rotors than to have these rear rotors machined. So I'm just going to smack this thing off here with a hammer after I put some rust penetrant on here. Couple taps and this thing is good to go. Now in order to replace this rotor, there was two sizes and they needed to know the diameter, so I took a quick measurement. I had about 10¼ inches. And now we're on to the front. I'm going to undo my slide pins, make sure they're moving freely. And then we are going to pop this caliper out of the way so we can get a good look at our pads. Now the outboard pad on this wasn't too terrible, definitely getting thin. The inboard pad was worn so thin we could barely get an indicator in there. So now I'm going to pop these pads off, and you can see the tapered wear that we have here due to the amount of rust built up on the brake rotor. So I actually had to use a hammer to chip the rust off of the rotor so I could get my micrometer on there to take a measurement, which you'll see here coming up. Now I was measuring in inches. The specs were in millimeters, so I did have to convert that, and it ended up being about 10 thousandths, I think, difference on this that I had for machining. But if you take a sheet of paper, it's right around 3 thousandths, 4 thousandths is what I had on this sheet of paper. So that's only a couple sheets of paper essentially that we were looking at there. So this is getting all new rotors. Before I put the new rotors on, I am going to go through and clean up the hub surfaces. If these hub surfaces are not clean, we can induce a runout problem to our brand new brake rotors when we install them. Real quick, doesn't take long, just go through everything, make sure you have the rust ground down and out of the way. We don't need to get this 100% clean back to new metal. We just need to make sure we've got no hunks of rust protruding away from our flat metal surface. Now before I install my new rotors, I always make sure I give them a good cleaning. I generally start with the outside of the rotor, so that way when I flip it upside down, my clean surface doesn't touch anything. Now I go over them twice. I spray them with a good dose of brake cleaner, wipe them with a rag, spray them with another dose of brake cleaner again to try and get all of these manufacturing oils off of them. Flip your rag over to a clean spot. Flip your rotor over again 2 times. Nice soaking. Wipe it down. Soak it down again. And flip your rag over to get a clean area. This ensures we don't contaminate our brand new brake pads with any oils when we put it all back together. So on the rear of this Jeep, there is a access plug in here. So the new rotors do not come with a new plug to fill that hole, so we need to pop the one out of the old rotor. Now I'm going to take a lateral runout measurement. I put 2 lug studs on here and torqued them down. It wouldn't hurt to put all of them on here, but as long as we got 2, we get a good gist. And I had no excessive runout there. We were within 0.02 of an inch. So putting our pads on, we need to make sure that we attach a squealer on here. Some pads will come with a squealer pre-attached, some don't. I always pay attention to the old pads to find out where the squealer is at and then assemble it to match. Now I'm using ceramic pads. I highly recommend ceramic pads. So you can see here we've got some rusted up caliper brackets that have these pads pinned in there pretty tight. So I am going to take and clean the caliper bracket up after I pull off my hardware clips. A little screwdriver is about the best tool for these. And then I'm going to take this to my die grinder actually and clean that up. So there's the wheel I use on my die grinder most of the time for this. We need to get all that rust off of there, get it cleaned up again. Now this does expose bare metal, so it's important that we put some protectant on there. I'm just going to use my caliper slide grease and pack that into there to help prevent any more rust before I put my new clips in position. So just make sure that you install the clips the same way you remove them. And we want to make sure the clips are retained in the proper spot. On some vehicles, clips can contact the rotor if they're not put in the proper spot, and that's going to cause you some noise once you get everything assembled back together. A lot of times they'll push on there easily, sometimes you got to give them a little tap. So I do also lubricate the ears of my brake pads. This will help keep the brake pads sliding smoothly, and the clips. Some people don't like doing this because it can also collect dirt and debris. I have found that it's been a very effective way for me to ensure that my pads stay moving free throughout their lifespan. So the other thing we need to do is clean and lubricate our slide pins. A lot of times a little bit of brake cleaner on here, if you don't have any rust pitted into them, will be enough. You can see brake clean, wipe it with a rag, we're good to go. The other one that I got here was pretty well pitted, so I am going to slide on my safety glasses and run this thing through the wire wheel on the die grinder. Doesn't take a lot of force to do this. You just need to clean that surface rust off of there to make sure that this thing will ride freely. You may even not have rust built up on it. Could just be some of the rubber degraded in there and it's sticking to it. Or your compound that was in there, the original lube, has dried up. So make sure you get it cleaned up nicely. We want to make sure we've got a nice rust-free, smooth surface for this caliper slide. Voila, ready to rock and roll. Again, more of our synthetic caliper slide lube. very important to put plenty on here. Sometimes I'll even squirt a little extra in the hole, but I was actually running low. So to compress these caliper pistons, super simple. A pair of channel locks make this nice and easy to do. Now this caliper was easier to assemble one slide pin together on the top before it was all put together, just the construction of how this system worked. So you need to get your caliper mounting bracket bolted in before we go any further on this system. And then I'm going to install my outer brake pad. I did also add some of that synthetic caliper lube to the back sides of the brake pads to help reduce any noise that we may have. Once you get your slides all tightened up, you're basically done with this corner of the vehicle. So make sure you torque everything down to factory specs, obviously, right? So just to prove, I did do run out for every corner of the car. Here I am on the front, and I have 2 thousandths or less run out at all 4 rotors, which is within spec. Just wanted to point out I had a caliper hanger there holding my caliper in place. My pads are moving nice and free. Now I need to compress this caliper before I install it. Simple C-clamp on this one, making sure it's positioned where it won't cause any damage. It's on the banjo bolt here for the brake line, one of the old pads, so I can squarely compress the piston in. Notice I'm going nice and slow, not trying to rush this. Last step I'm going to do once I have these calipers on and drive is check temperatures. I check all 4 corners to make sure they're roughly equal, 150 degrees.